maybe I was the first journalist to answer an ad in the papers and then to get there in the newsroom of the Romanian section of the BBC World Service, following an open competition. Years later, some of my colleagues told us, we hated you when you came, because they were all old emigres, and we changed the perspective, and of course the BBC World Service wanted to have new journalists who would speak the Romanian language as it was spoken at the time, and who would bring fresh information from Romania. But the people who were there did not really like the fact that there was competition from journalists coming straight from the formerly occupied country. What I discovered was a total lack of interest among the citizens of Western Europe for the East, and nobody cared. And in a way, Mr. Oberreiter said the same. Everybody was worried about the costs. Everybody was worried about, oh my God, these people are here, they don't wash their feet, what are we going to do with them? They smell, they make noise, they are not good, we don't want them. Some of us are the same way today, 20 years later, as you can see in Italy. But the reaction then was not a friendly one. I mean, not that, okay, it's good for you that you're no longer under the communist rule, but we don't really care. And that was the impression of also the British people that I met at the time. And even before, I admit I was in Germany in a very lucky year with many DAAD scholarships, and I was surprised, I almost cried with revolt, to hear some of my German young people that were my age, so 20, who said, that was before 89, so years before, I'm not going to tell you how many years, and they said, what are my parents blabbing about when they talk about Eastern Germany, saying that half of our people was submitted to an unjust treatment? It's a completely different people, and we don't really care about them. Those were young Germans, university students, and I was quite surprised. I said, my God, if they don't feel anything for their own people, for their own Germans, how would they ever understand what is going on in the rest of the country and what in the rest of the Eastern Bloc? Of course, there were examples of solidarity, like Coopération Village Roumain, like other groups, small groups in the West. But what really struck me then, and in a way strikes me now, is that we lived a very different history. If we take the chronology of all the, chronologically all the main events that are imprinted in the mind of a Western person until 1989, they will be extremely, for instance, impressed by Watergate or by other big dilemmas in their history. Watergate didn't mean anything to us. I'm just taking, an event which is known in both.
No social contract with the Soviet Party.
They didn't really care. Most of them didn't. We know there are those famous books, even written by Romanian intellectuals, about how French intellectuals didn't care about what's going on in the East, because the French intellectuals were left-oriented, and you are not going to say anything bad about a communist country. It was a big problem. Even 1968, and there was a brilliant session of a scientific session in Washington organized by the Romanian Cultural Institute about 1968, and that was really a problem for left-wing intellectuals in the East. So, what struck me when I got to London, to come back to the question that Mr. Idu asked, was how little they knew about us, how little they cared about us, how little they had known, and how little they had cared. So I don't think there was any interest in the press until, there were the events of 1989, and then there was, unfortunately, the miners' assault on Bucharest in June 1990. So that, and that sort of put a lid and a seal on Romania for very, very many years. And we have not, in the eyes of the West, recovered since. That was painful to bear, and that was difficult. And I think even today there are these differences. You don't read about the East too much, and there is not, maybe it's our fault, maybe we don't know how to present ourselves, but I think it's probably part of the greater skepticism and lack of interest in the really deep processes of history that define the world on both sides of the former divide. That would go from Szczecin down to Trieste. So these are the thoughts I had on these events. And to come back to what Armand Koshu said, all right, we owed Gorbachev a lot, but on the other hand, it was the Russians that made us suffer for 45 years, so it was their duty to get us out of it. I'm not going to be overly grateful. They had to give up Eastern Europe because, not out of democratic convictions they had. Okay, Suslov, I admit, they were a new generation. But on the other... Yes, I know, but anti-Suslov, what you said about the new generation in the... Gorbachev was a new generation. Right, but even their democratic convictions were not so deep. And I don't know if they did it out of their...
Not at all.
I don't know if they didn't do it because of a love of democracy, but because the system had failed and collapsed. So what, it was a calculated loss. Better give up Eastern Europe, which is costing too much, and we can't support the whole thing anymore. Whereas, seen from the American side, it was a continuation of a crusade, which they had. I know this word sounds horrible in the Middle East, but it was in the name of ideals that they had, and it was in the name of a political program which, in a way, they had, and I'm not being naive, they had pursued throughout their history. So I think I'm not going to be really grateful to the Soviet Union, even though I accept that Mr. Gorbachev was forced by history to play an important role. It was a history that pushed him somehow. What I would expect and would hope from the European Union right now, from the European Commission and all the other bodies, is to try and I know this is in a way being done, try to foster some understanding, make a parallel chronology of events, try to get people on both sides to understand why the other half is the way it is. Even though I know young people are not the same, but it would help even the younger generations to have a better understanding of the history. Thank you.